Back in 2019, I was chairing the City of Long Beach's Technology and Innovation Commission. And as a commissioner, we would do community events and community engagement. And as we were talking to residents, it became pretty obvious that many of them failed to realize that when we talk about data collection, they would talk about how federal agencies were potentially tracking them, or how the DMV might use their license plate data in a non-stated way. But they really sort of had a lack of understanding that local government was also collecting data on them. And of course, we know that this city deploys all kinds of devices and platforms and software that collects personally identifiable information. That these surveillance technologies are ubiquitous. Just think about public Wi-Fi, traffic cameras, license plate readers. Every business and home in Long Beach has a smart water meter that collects incredibly granular data on our water consumption. Passport parking app. It goes on and on. So as a commission, we decided that we wanted to do some research to gauge residents' attitudes and comfort levels with surveillance technologies that were deployed by the city. And over the next couple of years, we did a broad range of research. And we conducted focus groups with 82 residents. We facilitated data walks where we took residents around to city-deployed technologies, and there was an app. When they encountered those technologies, they would respond to prompts. We hosted community forums. We also disseminated a survey that asked all kinds of questions about particular technologies that the city had deployed, and also some broad questions and some hypotheticals. And I'm just going to share one of the key findings from that survey because it's very relevant to the project. So one of the questions was, how concerned are you that the use of smart city technologies could mean less privacy for Long Beach residents? And as you can see, about 80% of respondents said that they were somewhat concerned or strongly concerned about their privacy. So 80% of residents said that they were concerned about their privacy, but about the same percentage of respondents to the survey also said that they felt that smart tools and features were essential to the future of cities, including Long Beach. So we realized that there was a very clear tension here. And in response, the commission started working with city staff to develop a data privacy policy, which Long Beach City Council ultimately adopted in March of 2021. And actually in December, this past December, it was strengthened significantly. If we have time, we'll talk about that. But the purpose of the data privacy policy was trifold: to protect resident information, of course, but also to safeguard city data and systems. And then a really big one for this research was to foster resident trust. And what this means for the current project is that now we have a city partner that is completely committed to implementing data privacy practices. And that's a really great thing. But after this data privacy policy was adopted, I was, kind of thinking about, this is, in essence, just words on paper, and how can we really operationalize it? And in 2023, I applied for a National Science Foundation award from the Smart and Connected Communities program, and I applied for a planning grant. And the idea, after talking to our co-PI, Omar Moncayo, and Ryan Kurtzman with the city, neither of them could be here today, but we decided that we wanted to create a digital rights platform to advance Long Beach's data privacy policies. And from my perspective, my research questions were really aimed at examining both how the platform would impact residents' behavior and simultaneously how the platform would impact city practices when they deployed surveillance technologies. So we collaborated in the beginning with Helpful Places, which is a social impact startup based in Toronto. And Helpful Places has developed this open source communication standard that is geared at increasing transparency and accountability for technologies in public places. And it uses text and iconography to convey how public technologies are collecting technology, whether the data is stored or sold or shared, whether it's encrypted or not, how long data are retained. So it's like a 7-layer data chain. And based on that open source language, we started inventorying city technologies. So we worked with city staff, who then worked with the vendors to complete these worksheets that would complete fields for all of those different data chain criteria. And once we had all the information, we designed data privacy labels. And here are examples of 3 of them. We initially did them for 24 techs. And each one of them had sort of a catchy pun at the top. So here's just an example for the smart water meters: want to learn about your personal data flow. And then we decided just that we didn't want the signs to be too cluttered, because as you can see, there's already a lot on them. So we only used 2 icons. We said we wanted to convey visually what the technology was doing and why. And then if you look at the bottom, you can see that each sign has a unique QR code. And the idea was that when residents encountered the labels adjacent to the technology they were interacting with, they would scan the QR code and it would take them to this digital rights platform, which exists, and if anybody's interested, you could check it out. And when you scan the QR code for a specific technology, it'll take you right to that entry in the digital rights platform, and you can see the data chain there and learn much more about how the city is collecting and using your data. So each one of these, if you click on it, there's like a paragraph or so of detail. And then we did user testing with these labels in March of 2024. So we posted them adjacent to technologies in 3 diverse neighborhoods in the city of Long Beach. In downtown, we printed the signs in English and Spanish. In North Long Beach, we printed the signs in English and Spanish as well. And then in central Long Beach, where we have a very large Cambodian population, we posted the data privacy labels in English and Khmer. And then we had residents, we worked with an app developer to develop an app specifically for our data walks. And same thing, when residents encountered the technologies, a series of prompts appeared and they responded to them. It was questions asking about their attitudes toward the technologies, if they're comfortable with them, if they have any concerns, if the labels would change the way they used or chose not to interact with those technologies in the future. And then also, we had them go to the digital rights platform and answer questions about how useful that was as well. We had tons of findings from our user testing, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to mention 2 that directly lead into the work we're doing with Norman and his colleagues at CMU. So one of the things we learned from the user testing is that residents felt like they loved the transparency piece, and they thought it was really great that their local government wanted to be open about the data it was collecting on residents. But they felt that they still were not empowered by the signs. And people said things like, it would just, the labels would just be one more thing I'd really not pay attention to. I'm just being honest. You're already so bombarded with cookie permissions and all this other stuff. The signs next to the bike share and the Lime and Razor scooters, somebody said this: I want to get on a bike. I don't really have time to read all that. I'm not going to take time to scan a QR code. So we got a lot of comments like that. And then the other thing that residents said is that they wanted agency. They were like, where's my opt-out? So here's a couple of comments. One thing that really struck me today is how many amazing city services I'm essentially locked out of if I choose not to sacrifice my privacy. And then I'll just read the last one. Another platform tester asserted that data privacy labels should tell me about opt-out or alternatives that are reasonable. So we really took that to heart, and we started thinking about how can we actually make it possible for residents to not just know what data the city's collecting on them and how it's being used, but to actually exercise the rights that are available to residents under the California Consumer Privacy Act. And that's when I started researching, and I learned about a project that Norman was leading with the IoT assistant, and I'm going to let him take it from here.
So thank you, Gwen. So the timing of the inquiry from Gwen and the City of Long Beach was very fortuitous. We had deployed an IoT privacy infrastructure, which I actually described at this very conference back in 2020. The infrastructure had been running, but we had reached a bit of a plateau. And that had to do with the fact that we had, for instance, deployed with the city of Amsterdam earlier, but we're focusing at that time primarily on conveying information through an app that people could use as they were going about, and the app could also be configured to notify people about data collection near their location. But beyond that, again, we really wanted to go and move beyond this ability and empower people to also exercise their rights. And just around 2023, for those of you who know, and I think that's probably everybody in this room here, CPRA came into force. And CPRA also introduced the notion of authorized agent, which means that all of a sudden, rather than potentially requiring people to authenticate with every different entity with which they want to exercise their rights, there is now a door that's been opened for people to rely on an entity submitting requests on their behalf. And that has been an important part of the work that we have been doing and that I'll briefly report on here. So this IoT privacy infrastructure from the very beginning, our emphasis has been on trustworthiness through accountability, making people who publicize their resources accountable for the information they provide, and there are a variety of different mechanisms in place to do that. We aim to support agency and control also from the beginning, but it required this authentication process with every single resource, and that's obviously not the way to go if you want to minimize user burden. And beyond that, the idea that you have to scan a QR code every time you go somewhere to be able to exercise those rights, that was something that clearly we wanted to avoid as well. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, the IoT privacy infrastructure revolves around two different main pieces of technology. There's a portal where people who own resources and collect data about people can go about describing their resources, their data practices, and the privacy rights that they want to extend to users. And there is another piece of the infrastructure that relies on an app that has been available in the iOS App Store and the Google Play Store for over 5 years, actually 6 years at this point. And that enables people to go about and discover data collection about them and to potentially also exercise privacy rights in those, if those rights are extended. So our timing, unfortunately, when we deployed this infrastructure initially was very poor. We deployed in February of 2020, which was just the time when COVID started. And so within the first 2 weeks, things were going great. We got tens of thousands of downloads of the app, and then things, as you can imagine, quickly died down. And so by the time Gwen contacted us, we did have about 100,000 resource descriptions that we're hosting on the platform. We had worked with the city of Amsterdam, publicizing the presence of a variety of different sensors, about 1,300 sensors, things like license plate scanners in parking lots. Obviously, in Amsterdam, they love to track bikes and all sorts of other things. And so the work that we've been doing now with Gwen and the city of Long Beach has been to overhaul this infrastructure to take advantage of some of the lessons learned from Gwen's study, as well as the new opportunities that have been made possible by CCPA and CPRA. So this includes user-facing enhancements, such as the ability for people to filter what they want to be notified about so that you don't get notified every second you run into another device collecting your data, ability to also rely on authorized agents and mechanisms to more easily submit privacy rights, as well as also technology that makes it a lot easier for vendors to describe their data practices, including things like templates that can be reused. It's not the case that every parking lot, has to necessarily redescribe everything from scratch. And all the while trying to also remain jurisdiction agnostic. We want to continue. This platform is available in over 30 different countries. And so I'm going to keep things very short. I see times, which is not consistent. This tells me that I've got 6 minutes. So hopefully, I can get a couple more minutes here. But an important part of what we do in this infrastructure is we try to make sure that we, CMU, are not responsible for all this data that's being publicized, right? And so the mechanism to do that is this concept of a registry. So for instance, the city of Long Beach has its own registry, and they're going to establish their own policies for what gets published in that registry. There are also mechanisms to make sure that anyone who wants to publish in their registry or another registry take responsibility for what they're publishing. They've got to basically tick some boxes and confirm that this is as accurate to the best of their knowledge, it's compliant with laws and all these other sorts of things. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but that has been a big part of the effort and convincing the lawyers at CMU that was actually okay to launch something like this. So acting as an authorized agent, lots of benefits that I've already argued for, but also challenges that we're still dealing with, right? So number one, you need to have APIs, right, that are made available by those vendors that you can connect to submit those privacy requests. As you know, the industry has developed fairly standardized ways of dealing with these consent management platforms and the like. You've got a number of different vendors in this space. And these vendors have sort of been a bit on the fence as to how far they want to go with this. So, for instance, we started by piggybacking on an effort that was led by Consumer Report, develop a protocol called the DRP protocol that works fully well. We've actually completely implemented this and adapted this to these scenarios here. But then at the last minute, some organizations had cold feet, and they decided they were no longer going to offer that to some of their customers. And so that led us to coming up with intermediary solutions in the meantime, which are currently available. And so one idea, if you want to reduce friction, is to say, hey, how about just using email requests? Right now, if I've got to start sending an email request and I've got to draft my email every time I send this to someone, that's going to be very, very painful. But what we could easily do is we could create templates for different types of requests. We can effectively customize the emails on behalf of users. We can pub this up in their email client, and they can then submit this, and then the entity at the other end has to respond. So that works very well. We're hoping to eventually have the DRP solutions adopted by vendors in Long Beach, and having this partnership with Long Beach that's putting a little bit of pressure on all these different vendors is expected to be very helpful. So this works super well. This is an example of how at that point with just a single click, right, you can submit your delete request, your opt-out request, and then you can also get status updates automatically in terms of how far along you are in getting this request processed. As you know, there are various delays that are being offered by these regulations. Registry owners, as I said, have to take responsibility for what they're publishing, and I'm going to quickly continue to wrap up. Actually, at this point, I have 3.5 minutes left, so I realize that we also want to have a minute or two for questions. Mm-hmm. So we've been onboarding some initial people with the City of Long Beach, entering some initial resources. We're starting with parking garages, scooters, bike rentals, smart water readers, and a bunch of other technologies that Gwen mentioned earlier. So this is actually a depiction of some of these resources in the City of Long Beach registry. Eventually, once we've got momentum, which is probably going to take a few more months, we plan to pilot this with real people and see if this makes a real difference. My best guess is we're probably not going to get there just in one shot. We believe in taking a user-centered design approach to this, and I expect it will be a variety of different iterations. We're also looking at how to engage in dialogues with users and all sorts of other things. So to quickly wrap up, right, empowering people to exercise their privacy rights, such as their CCPA opt-outs, is very challenging in general, as I think we all realize. But it's even more challenging, right, when you're dealing with smart city technologies, where you don't have a uniform interface to discover the existence of these resources, to interact with these privacy rights. And so we've built something that is there to fill this gap, and we're super excited to have a partner that's actually willing to work with us, perhaps put a little bit of pressure, bring people together, and hopefully help us build momentum so that we can start then engaging with other cities. I've actually talked to other people in this room here who've got companies that could very well be also perfect candidates to adopt these technologies. And so we're hoping to perhaps come back in a couple of years with more progress on this. Thank you very much. Thanks.